Imagine that one morning, upon waking up, your refrigerator, that seemingly indispensable appliance in your kitchen, stops working forever. It's not just a temporary power outage, there's no technician to fix it, and no new appliance arrives. Simply put, the possibility of cooling your food with electricity no longer exists. How would you face the challenge of preserving your food on a daily basis? For most modern people, this situation would be distressing. How would we keep the milk fresh, the meat ready to cook the next day, or the fish we just bought? We depend so much on refrigeration that it's hard to even conceive of life without it. However, not only is it possible, but there are entire communities that have lived this way for generations, developing techniques so effective they would make more than one contemporary chef blush. The Amish context cannot be understood without mentioning their history. This community descends from the European Anabaptists of the 16th century who sought a pious, simple life, set apart from the modern world, then linked to ecclesiastical and state power. By migrating to North America, they found in rural areas the perfect setting to cultivate their principles: simplicity, manual labor, community life, and resistance to the indiscriminate adoption of new technologies. Thus, meat preservation practices have been passed down from generation to generation, forming an essential part of their identity and guaranteeing their food self-sufficiency. In a hyper-connected world, where the supermarket is around the corner and industrial freezers are the norm, Amish techniques are fascinating. They remind us that humanity has survived millennia without refrigerators, creating ingenious methods to ensure a stable food supply. This doesn't mean that giving up technology is an ideal for everyone, but it does offer an opportunity to reflect on technological dependence and the value of traditions. Salt is one of humanity's oldest and most valued culinary treasures. Long before modern science existed, people already knew that salting foods delayed their spoilage. From ancient caravans crossing deserts to whaling fleets, everyone understood that salt was key to extending the shelf life of meat. It's no surprise that the Amish, heirs to European traditions and deeply rooted in rural life, have perfected the use of this mineral in preserving their food. The fundamental process is relatively simple, but it requires experience. After the annual slaughter, which usually takes place in the cooler months of the year, the Amish carefully select the cuts of meat and subject them to a salting process. The salt penetrates the fibers, absorbing moisture. This happens due to osmosis. The cells of the meat give up their water to the salt, and without water, bacteria have more difficulty multiplying. Thus, salt not only preserves but also intensifies the flavor of the meat, concentrating its natural juices and adding a unique mineral touch. However, it's not enough to just sprinkle salt randomly. The amount, the type of salt, usually coarsest salt without additives, the resting time, and environmental conditions all influence the final result. Too much salt can leave the meat excessively salty and tough, while too little won't ensure preservation. That's why Amish families pass down their recipes, proportions, and tricks from generation to generation. How long to let the meat rest, whether to cover it with linen cloths, what type of container to store it in, and when to remove the excess salt. In addition, salting is not an isolated act. It often forms part of a longer process. After salting, the meat may be placed in a smoker or hung in underground cellars to continue maturing. It can also be combined with sugar and spices, creating a range of flavors. It all depends on the purpose. There are salted meats for immediate consumption after a brief soak to remove excess salt, and others intended for long-term preservation. A well-known example is Amish-style cured ham. After meticulous salting, the ham is hung in a cool, airy place for weeks or months. Over time, the salt not only prevents bacterial growth but leaves its mark on the taste. When finely sliced, the ham reveals a rich aroma, a deep flavor, and a firm texture. A delicacy worthy of the finest tables, achieved without electricity, without artificial chemicals, only through the wise interaction between meat, salt, and air. Historically, salt was so valuable that it was used as currency in many cultures. In fact, the word salary comes from the practice of paying soldiers with salt. Without needing modern scientific explanations, the Amish embody this ancient wisdom. They know that salt is worth its weight in gold when it comes to keeping food safe and delicious. Their skill in salting meat with precision and consistency is one of the foundations of their food's self-sufficiency. Smoking is one of the most aromatic and evocative techniques in meat preservation. Its power lies not only in preserving the food, but also in transforming it, endowing it with deep flavor and a complex range of nuances. Since ancient times, humans discovered that hanging meat near a wood fire produced more than just heat. Exposure to dry smoke slowed spoilage, repelled insects, and imparted a distinctive taste. The Amish, with their profoundly rural and artisanal lifestyle, have perpetuated this tradition with admirable mastery. The process begins by selecting the right woods. Not all smoke is the same. Amish families who practice traditional smoking pay great attention to the type of wood they use. Hardwoods like hickory, oak, or maple produce a dense smoke with strong, earthy flavors, while cherry or applewood provide a milder, sweeter, and more fruity aroma. The choice of wood depends on the type of meat and the desired final outcome. A ham might require a wood that imparts robustness, while a homemade sausage might benefit from subtler nuances. Smoking is not a quick process. It can last days or even weeks, depending on factors like the climate, humidity, type of meat, and the desired level of smokiness. During this entire time, the meat is hung in special chambers, often simply wooden constructions with openings to allow smoke circulation. The Amish control the temperature and the amount of smoke intuitively, relying on the experience of previous generations. There are no digital thermometers or automatic programmers here. Everything is done by eye, touch, and smell, trusting ancestral knowledge. Smoke acts in multiple ways. First, it helps slightly dry the surface of the meat, reducing the moisture available to bacteria and fungi. Second, it provides natural antimicrobial compounds that inhibit microorganism growth. Third, it penetrates the meat's fibers, infusing them with volatile compounds that create unique flavors and aromas. The result is a final product with greater durability than fresh meat, which can hang in a cool pantry for long periods without spoiling. The smoky flavor is something that transcends mere preservation. Every bite of smoked ham or bacon is a sensory journey. You perceive sweet, bitter, acidic notes, and a subtle mineral background. It's like tasting the essence of the forest concentrated in a piece of food. It's not surprising that smoking has persisted throughout history in so many cultures. For the Amish, this technique fits perfectly with their rejection of modern technology. Smoking requires no electricity, and the wood often comes from their own forests or farms. In the end, smoking is not just a preservation method, but a culinary art. To behold an Amish pantry with smoked hams hanging is to see a gallery of silent masterpieces. Each piece is the result of time, patience, and skill. And each bite is a history lesson, reminding us that long before the invention of the refrigerator, there already existed a delicious and natural way to keep meat healthy and appetizing. Before the existence of plastic, cans, or vacuum packaging, animal fat was one of the most commonly used resources to preserve food. Lard could create a natural seal capable of isolating the meat from contact with the air, preventing bacterial growth and keeping it fresh for extended periods. In Amish culture, this preservation method has persisted, demonstrating that the simplest, most natural solutions are often the most effective. The technique involves cooking the meat whether boiled, roasted, or previously cured and then immersing or covering it with hot lard. When the lard cools, it solidifies and forms an airtight layer. Without oxygen, bacteria cannot multiply easily, and the meat remains remarkably well preserved for weeks or months, depending on storage conditions and the type of meat. The Amish often use lard for pork cuts, such as ribs or loins, but they can do it with other meats as well. The lard comes from the same animal being consumed, ensuring a cycle of total utilization. Nothing is wasted. The fat, which could be considered a byproduct, becomes a natural and edible container. When it's time to eat the meat, you remove the lard layer and find the product underneath intact, tender, juicy, with concentrated flavors and an appealing texture. Besides preservation, lard adds its own flavor. The fat conveys creamy notes and a feeling of satiety that can be welcomed during cold months or on days of intense labor. The Amish, who lead a physically active life, value these concentrated sources of energy. Lard is not seen as a health enemy but as a valuable resource that, consumed in moderation and as part of a balanced diet, can be beneficial. The technique of using lard for preservation has deep historical roots. In many European cultures, before the advent of modern refrigeration, whole stews were cooked and stored by covering them with fat. This allowed having ready meals during the harshest seasons, when hunting or harvesting might be scarce. The Amish inherited this knowledge from their European ancestors and adapted it to their current context, keeping a millennia-old tradition alive. Vinegar is another great natural preservative that humanity has employed for centuries. Its power lies in its acidity, capable of creating a hostile environment for bacteria. Commonly associated with pickling vegetables, vinegar can also play a prominent role in preserving meat. The Amish, attentive to the possibilities of every natural resource, have adapted the use of vinegar to their repertoire of techniques, creating pickled meats that turn out surprisingly tasty and long-lasting. The basic idea is simple. Immerse the meat in an acidic brine made of vinegar, salt, and sometimes sugar and spices. The vinegar's acidity alters the pH of the environment, making it difficult for microorganisms to proliferate. Also, like salt, vinegar helps extract some moisture from the meat. This process not only preserves the food but also modifies its taste and texture, resulting in a firm product, slightly sour but balanced by spices and salt. Meat preserved in vinegar is often associated with sausages and cured meats. Imagine a set of artisanal sausages, made from pork or beef, submerged in a mixture of cider vinegar, peppercorns, bay leaves, garlic, and perhaps a touch of dried chili. After resting for days or weeks in this acidic medium, the sausages develop an intense character, a complex flavor in which the vinegar's acidity enhances the meaty notes and the spices finish with an aromatic touch. The result is a product that can last for weeks without refrigeration, ready to be consumed whenever desired. This technique is not limited to sausages. Other cuts of meat, and even fish, can be pickled with vinegar. In the past, when modern refrigeration didn't exist, vinegar allowed rural communities to have a stable protein source over time, without relying on expensive equipment. For the Amish, it's another method in their arsenal, complementary to salt, smoke, and sugar. Choosing the type of vinegar is important. Cider vinegar provides mild acidity with fruity notes, while distilled white vinegar is more neutral and penetrating. Some Amish families experiment with red wine vinegar or even less common fruit vinegars, seeking unique nuances. They also play with the proportions of salt and sugar to achieve the desired balance. If the mixture is too acidic, the meat can become too tough or aggressive on the palate. If it's too mild, there's a risk of allowing bacteria to thrive. When we think of preserving meat, salt and smoke are the best-known techniques, but sweetness can also be a powerful preservation tool. Sugar curing is a less celebrated practice than salting or smoking, but it's no less effective or delicious. Since ancient times, when sugar was not yet industrially refined, honey, molasses, or maple syrup were used to help preserve certain foods. The Amish have inherited these traditions, creating sugar-cured meats with a subtle sweetness that surprises the modern palate. The principle is similar to that of using salt. Sugar, like salt, has the ability to draw moisture from the meat. Without moisture, bacteria have more difficulty reproducing, prolonging the product's shelf life. In addition, sugar adds a layer of flavor that balances the salty intensity of the cure, resulting in a unique flavor profile. Sugar-cured meat does not become a dessert, but it does acquire a caramelized surface, a slight sweetness that blends with the meat's umami taste. A classic example is sugar-cured bacon. Imagine thick slices of pork belly soaked in a mixture of salt and sugar, resting for days in a cool environment. Over time, the surface slightly hardens, becoming firm, and the aroma it emits is an intoxicating combination of sweetness and saltiness. When it's time to cook it, heat releases sweet and smoky fragrances if it has also undergone a light smoking session beforehand. The result is crispy bacon with a more complex flavor than common bacon, ideal for special breakfasts or to add depth to stews and sauces. But sugar isn't limited to bacon. Hams, loins, and other cuts can also benefit from this method. The exact proportion of salt and sugar is key. Too much sugar could attract insects or ferment improperly, while too little wouldn't achieve the desired preservation effect. Here, once again, collective knowledge and experience passed down through generations come into play. Amish families have their own recipes, secret proportions, and curing times perfected over the years. Sugar curing can also be complemented with spices. Black pepper, cloves, nutmeg, or even cinnamon can introduce additional nuances, transforming the cured piece into a true gourmet delicacy. Although the Amish do not pursue culinary sophistication for status reasons, their kitchen know-how often produces results worthy of haute cuisine. The simplicity of their methods and the quality of their raw materials combine to create flavors that many of us are unaware of in our industrialized daily life. Historically, sugar was once a luxury item reserved for the upper classes or used sparingly. Today it's widely available, but the Amish do not abuse it. They know that its preservative power integrates with other techniques, creating a perfect balance between sweet, salty, and smoky. In a world that associates sugar only with desserts and pastries, it's enlightening to discover that it can also be an ally in meat preservation. This technique invites us to broaden our culinary vision, reminding us that the most unexpected combinations can yield unforgettable products. Before there were refrigerators, the earth itself was the most faithful ally for preserving food. Underground cellars, known in English as root cellars, represent one of the oldest, simplest, and most effective solutions for keeping food fresh. In the Amish tradition, these cellars are still a key part of the household infrastructure. Built below ground, they use the natural temperature and humidity of the earth to maintain a stable, dark, and cool environment, perfect for storing cured meat, tubers, vegetables, and other products. The constant subterranean temperature, which ranges from about 39°F to 50°F to 10°C to 10°C, depending on the area and depth, is the secret of these cellars. While outside there may be abrupt climate changes, inside the underground cellar conditions remain relatively stable. Darkness, controlled ventilation, and the absence of sunlight slow the growth of microorganisms and the natural degradation of foods. For the Amish, this means having a space where cured meat, whether salted, smoked, or sweetened with sugar, can hang for weeks or months without spoiling. Building an underground cellar is no trivial matter. It requires choosing the right place, digging to the correct depth, and ensuring a solid foundation. Often simply materials are used: stones, wood, bricks, or even clay. The shape of the cellar may vary, but the essentials are that it remain cool, with moderate humidity and no leaks that could cause flooding or mold. Amish families often pass down this building knowledge, knowing that a good cellar is a long-term investment that will serve several generations. Entering an Amish underground cellar feels like traveling back in time. Instead of electric lights, there may be kerosene lamps or candles. Instead of metal shelves, simple wooden racks. There hang smoked hams, dry sausages, aged cheeses, and barrels of lard or jars of preserves. It's also common to find root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, beets, and apples, kept fresh for months thanks to the controlled temperature. This form of preservation is not only effective but also sustainable. It consumes no electricity, generates no plastic waste, and doesn't depend on complicated devices. The underground cellar takes advantage of the Earth's thermal inertia, using the soil as a natural insulator. Moreover, by keeping food close to home, the Amish reduce their dependence on outside markets and strengthen their food self-sufficiency. Historically, root cellars were used all over the world, from Europe to Asia and throughout North America. They were the refrigerator before the fridge existed. The arrival of electric refrigeration pushed them into oblivion in many cultures, but the Amish have preserved them, proving their effectiveness despite the passage of time. The presence of underground cellars in Amish farms is a reminder that there are slower, more organic, and cleaner ways to preserve our food resources. In a world where everything seems to revolve around immediacy and energy consumption, these cellars offer a haven of stability and ancestral wisdom. Observing them, we understand that nature gives us tools to preserve food without needing to force it, simply by working with it. It's a lesson in humility, adaptation, and respect for the environment. In regions where winter is long and cold, nature provides a valuable resource that the Amish have learned to use: the ambient temperature. When the mercury falls below zero and snow covers the fields, the outside world becomes a giant freezer. Before there were refrigerators, rural communities already knew this trick. Hanging or storing meat outdoors, protected from animals and excessive moisture, allowed it to be preserved for weeks or even months. For the Amish, winter is both a challenge and an opportunity. On the one hand, they must face freezing temperatures and tougher working conditions. On the other, those same temperatures provide the possibility of preserving meat without additional energy expenditure. After the autumn slaughter, When the weather starts to cool, cuts of meat can be hung in porches, sheds, or well-ventilated spaces, covered with tarps or burlap sacks that allow air circulation but prevent snow or rain from spoiling them. Natural freezing not only prevents bacterial growth but also affects the meat's texture. As ice crystals form inside the muscle fibers, the meat becomes more tender when finally thawed. This phenomenon, which the modern industry takes advantage of with controlled refrigeration chambers, here occurs spontaneously and for free, courtesy of winter. For Amish families, this means having a source of meat ready to consume throughout the cold season, without needing technological intervention. However, this method requires caution. Temperature fluctuations can be misleading. If one day the temperature unexpectedly rises, the meat could start to spoil. Thus, the Amish must pay attention to weather forecasts, regularly inspect the meat's condition, and, if necessary, move it to a cooler place or use other complementary methods such as salting or smoking to ensure the product remains in good condition. Using winter as a natural freezer is a perfect example of adapting to the environment. Instead of fighting against the weather conditions, the Amish embrace them, using them to their advantage. This attitude is consistent with their worldview. It's not about dominating nature with machines, but collaborating with it, understanding its rhythms and cycles, and finding simple and efficient solutions. Moreover, this strategy reduces dependence on external markets. There's no need to buy ice or maintain costly refrigeration equipment. Meat frozen outdoors can supply the family for much of the winter, complemented by other products preserved with salt, smoke, or vinegar. This combination of methods ensures a varied and nutritious supply, without the need for electricity. Contemplating a winter landscape on an Amish farm, with carefully protected pieces of meat hanging on a support, is an image that invites reflection. In today's civilization, we take for granted that refrigeration is a technologically driven, centralized process. However, here we see that the biggest refrigerator in the world is the winter climate itself, as long as we know how to use it. Once again, ancestral wisdom surpasses technological dependency, reminding us that nature offers surprisingly simple solutions to our modern problems. Allowing these reflections to accompany us, even if we're not going to hang hams in the basement tomorrow, can enrich us. Understanding that the lack of refrigeration doesn't necessarily mean deprivation, but an invitation to creativity, collaboration, and wisdom acquired over time. Thus, the next time we open our fridge, we might value a bit more the luxury it represents and remember with admiration those who keep ancient ways of preserving meat alive. If you liked the video, subscribe to learn more about Amish methods for living without depending on modern technology.